By the time you see this video, it's gonna be 2024, so Happy New Year. But as of now, it's almost 9 p.m. on the last day of 2023. And I'm going back to work 3 days later on the 3rd of January, so I can contribute to the society by paying taxes and continue to live this life of nihilism. God, I am so negative. Anyways, you're here for the books and I shall deliver them to you. The first book that I liked among 70 plus books that I read last year and would recommend to you is The Dark Interval by Rainer Maria Rilke, an Austrian poet. He wrote more than 14,000 letters throughout his life, and most of them were addressed to people who had met him briefly or had read his works. Within this vast correspondence, there are many letters of condolence. I picked this book up because my grandpa passed away at the end of last year, and just in recent years, the loss of many people in my life really caught me off guard. Their departures were so abrupt that I felt these people had just slipped away silently. It dawned on me that I've reached an age where I need to learn how to face death, and growing older has brought me this sobering recognition that life is fragile and the spectre of mortality looms over every moment. I feel like sometimes living in the present is not enough. I need to live in the present with the awareness that death could come at any moment. So returning to Rilke's letters, what I've learned is that we could contemplate the concept of beyond and view our departed loved ones as stars in the sky, watching over and protecting us. But doing so distances us from the deceased. Yes, we can rely on religion or other means that might help us gloss over the pain and spare us from the hard work of acknowledging death. But doing so is no more than denying death. And how can we live a full, real life without confronting the pains presented by death? I think it's really hard, but we must somehow learn to explore what life has to offer in all its dimensions. And as Rilke suggests in his letters, we must stay with our pain and, instead of shrinking away from it, use it to carve out a new path back to life. There's a long quote that I want to share from one of his letters. Where to, finally, can death drive a person we have unspeakably borne in our heart, but into that very heart? Where would the idea of this beloved being and his unceasing influence? For how could this influence cease, which, while he was still alive among us, had already become more and more independent of his tangible presence? Where would this always secret influence be more secure than within us? I reproach all modern religions for providing their believers with consolations and embellishments of death instead of giving their soul the means to reconcile and communicate with it. With death, with its complete and unmasked cruelty, a cruelty so horrific that it completes the circle by reaching all the way back to an extreme mildness, which is as great, pure, and utterly clear. All consolation is murky, as we never imagined the sweetest spring day to be. So yeah, that's the first book, this collection of letters for moments of grief. I just saw fireworks outside. The next book is my first Dickens novel, Great Expectations, which I think is a much better place to start with him than, say, Oliver Twist, because I just can't seem to finish that one. And this is one of those books that makes me exclaim, I'm so glad that I read despite my ADHD, because through the main character Pip, I see the flaws in myself. I also see the child that I once was being treated unkindly by my stepmother, and altogether it makes me feel humbled and want to better myself. So this is a coming-of-age story, and we follow the life of Pip, brought up by hand by his sister, 20 years older than him. So it begins on Christmas Eve when Pip, about 7 or 8 years old, encounters an escaped convict who asks Pip to bring him some food the following day. Pip is obviously scared at first, but also a bit intrigued, and this act of kindness sets up ripples that echo through Pip's and the convict's life for many years to come. The story explores the poignant aspect of growing up through Pip's eyes. We see in the beginning how ambitious and almost snobbish young Pip is, and how he aspires to be a gentleman. to later how humbled older Pip becomes after encountering and revisiting his old friends. So you will see this mixture of hope and regret as Pip grows up and what gets left behind on his journey from childhood to maturity. And it made me reflect upon mine. So for this reason, I found this novel very enlightening and, moralizing. And because it was originally serialized, so it's very gripping and suspenseful. So that's Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. The third book is 식사를 못한 날 다섯 그를 또 가려는 준례の年, and I have 2 copies of this book, paperback and hardback. What a waste of money. Anyways, this is a book that before I read it, I already fell in love with the book title. This is a book that tells a story about what remains in life after the magic and promises of youth have faded, which is reminiscent of Great Expectations. I read the book title in Japanese because the English title can't fully capture the subtlety in the original Japanese title. So I'm gonna spend the next 2 minutes rambling on this book title. So if you don't want to listen, you can just skip ahead. So here, 식사 못하나요? This entire expression corresponds to colorless in the translated English title. Actually, I'm just gonna put it on screen instead of holding this book the whole time. But if you want to say colorless in Japanese, it'd be iro no nai. So iro means color and nai serves as a negation. But instead of iro, Murakami used shikisai, which is a more literary way of saying the word color in Japanese, and it does not have an equivalent English word. And motanai means not having something. And in Japan and many other Asian countries, surname comes first. It comes before your name. So the entire expression shikisai motanai tazaki tsukuru means tsukuru tazaki, who does not have color. And it's a curious expression because you wouldn't say shikisai motanai. You would never say that when all you want to say is iro no nai. So clearly Murakami is trying to, tell his reader something. And what he wants to express is more than the simple word colorless. And I'll get to what he means later. And now let's look at the main character's name. Tazaki Tsukuru. Tazaki is written in kanji or Chinese characters, and Tsukuru is written in hiragana. And here's the thing, so when Japanese parents, and the same for Chinese parents, choose a name for their child, they would look in a dictionary to look for kanji or Chinese characters that can, for example, symbolize the parents' hope for their child. But you can see Tsukuru's name is not written in kanji, and if his name is truly only written in hiragana and there's no corresponding kanji for it, then it's a boring name. It doesn't stand out, So maybe Tsukuru as a person or Tsukuru's life is just like his name. Very dull, very bland, and very colorless, whatever that means. Another thing is that there are a lot of homophones in Japanese and Chinese names. So choosing names, is really different. So for example, by the way, this is not a spoiler, Tsukuru's name does have a corresponding kanji and it's written like this, and it means to make. While Tsukuru's dad thought about this, Tsukuru, which means to create, he felt that giving his son a name like that would put too much pressure on him. So he decided on Tsukuru to make. So by different, I mean the homophones in Japanese names are not like An with an E and An without an E. And Kare no Junrei no Toshi is just his years of pilgrimage. There's nothing I can add to that. So from the book title, you can get a glimpse into the story about a guy embarking on some kind of spiritual journey to discover himself. I just like the book title so much that I feel a large portion of the reason why I like the book is because of the title. Anyways, let's talk about the story, which can be divided into 2 parts. The colorless phase and the pilgrimage journey. We follow Tsukuru, a 35-year-old rail engineer who recounts his past to his girlfriend, the past that has haunted him for 15 years. So what happened? Well, back in high school in his hometown in Nagoya, he was in a tight-knit group of friends. Including Tsukuru, there were 5 people in this group. And each of his friends' last names contains a word of color. Red, blue, white, and black, except for Tsukuru. His surname does not have a color in it, so he is the colorless one in the group. Or at least he thought so. And he was afraid that one day he might be ostracized from his group of friends because of that. And indeed, 15 years ago, his worst fear materialized. He received a call from one of his friends that he was no longer part of them without being told why. And the shock and pain he got have afflicted him for 15 years. And he has been depressed, friendless, and quite lost in life. So the meaning of colorless is twofold. His name does not have color in it, and his life has become colorless as he becomes conscious of this fact. And the pilgrimage part of the story is about Tsukuru revisiting his old friends to find out why he was, cut off from them with the help of his girlfriend. And his years of pilgrimage in the title is a nod to Liszt's homesickness from his years of pilgrimage. And Tsukuru's journey is accompanied by that melody, which gives the story a musical layer and a melancholic touch, which I quite like. And also, there's no magical realism in the story, so that kept my sanity in check after reading it. Well, I read 3 books by Ishiguro this year, Kazuo Ishiguro, and I need to take this down. Never Let Me Go, The Remains of the Day, and An Artist of the Floating World. And my favorite is obviously this one. I said in many videos about how much I admired Ishiguro's ability to adopt a calm tone to tell a meandering story that uncovers the abyss beneath our illusory sense of connection with the world. And after reading An Artist of the Floating World, I just can't help but imagine the parallel universe where Ishiguro is both a writer and a translator, translating works by Kawabata Yasunari and, Mishima Ikio into English. I just feel like this is what a perfectly translated Japanese novel would read like in English. And this is because of Ishiguro's parents, especially his mother, who was really conscious of, including Japanese values in his upbringing. The story takes place in 1956 and we follow a British butler, not Sebastian, but I am looking forward to the new anime show, but Mr. Stevens. He is employed by American businessman Mr. Faraday after his previous employer, Lord Darlington, passed away. With Mr. Faraday leaving England for a couple of weeks, he suggests Stevens take a road trip. So Stevens, once in a long time, sets off on a motoring tour to the West Country in England. During this 6-day trip, he reflects on his past about how devoted he was to Lord Darlington. And he also tells you why he believes that he is qualified as a first-rate butler because of how, he neglected his emotions. It's not like he is flaunting this in some sort of perverse way, but his upbringing and his pursuit of professionalism have deprived him of the ability to register, feel, let alone express emotions and care. And it's such a tragic story because I just grabbed a snack. Oh my god, I am losing it. Because he realizes at the end of his journey that he has almost wasted his entire life because of a misplaced sense of loyalty and has devoted his duty to an establishment that is entirely unworthy of it. If you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. And what remains of the day for him is to go back to Darlington Hall, to Mr. Faraday, to live out his unfulfilled life in regret and try to master the art of bantering for Mr. Faraday, which is totally out of an old-fashioned British butler's league. He is just so noble, yet so tragic. I also recommended this book to my mom and she liked it, but told me it was really hard to read because, a lot of it is interior narration, because this is my mom's first Ishiguro book. And I think the best place, to be honest, to start with Ishiguro is Clara and the Sun. The last book is One Piece, and I must have been crazy to having a book like this. So this is a book about, as I said in my February wrap-up, some big events of history and the small lives that inhabit those events. It's a book about cause and effect, about whether we have free will or not, and about how one should look at death. And the reason why Tolstoy wrote this book and wrote it in the way it is because Tolstoy didn't like the way historians studied and recorded history. Historians like to focus on the heroes, the prominent figures of, historical events, because they seem to be the driving force behind them. However, Tolstoy disagreed with this perspective. While figures like Napoleon provide direction for their nations, the actual driving force of historical movements comes from the general mass of people involved in them. Morally, it is the wield of power, like the Tsar, who causes the event, but physically, it is those who submit to the power, like soldiers. One can't exist without the other, so the cause of the event is not found in either party alone, but in the union of the two. And the problem with how historians studied those events is that they ignored the other half that is equally important. And that's why Tolstoy wrote this book, where fictional characters like peasants and aristocrats mix and mingle with historical figures. And to illustrate his point, Tolstoy, on multiple occasions, interrupts the narrative and starts his own lecture, comparing history to the process of integration. That's right, integrals. I had goosebumps when I was reading those parts because I was a math student and I didn't know history could be this cool. This book has changed the way I view history, or at least I wish I could say so because I never listened to a single history class, so I lack some common sense. And oh my god, I just found out this year, please don't unsubscribe after hearing this, that the Battle of Waterloo took place in Belgium, not Canada. And in retrospect, that made sense. In the book, there are actually multiple storylines, and we mainly follow Pierre, Prince Andrei, and Natasha. And it's incredibly accessible. Every chapter is short, and every several chapters, Tolstoy switches between storylines, so I never got tired of reading this book. And these days, the world is just fraught with outbreaks of war. And with the help of technology, we are closer than ever to Tolstoy's version of history retelling. And the closer we look at every action of an individual soldier, the closer we are to the truth of those wars. I read this Wall Street Journal article detailing a Russian soldier surrendering to a Ukrainian drone, and I just didn't have words to describe my feelings. I was in shock. It was such a great article, I will link it. Like Tolstoy argued in War and Peace, we are not our own people, and what we have, the so-called freedom of choice, doesn't exist. Our perspectives, beliefs, and subsequent choices and actions are influenced by what we see and read, which are shaped by greater powers way beyond our comprehension and control. And the same is true for that Russian soldier as well, I believe. So yeah, I don't know why I am ending this video on such a grave note. But anyways, that wraps up this wrap-up for 2023. And Happy New Year! Thank you for watching as always.